So this one stings a little bit, Eric.
Do you feel stung?
Oh yeah, no, I've been stung, and I could say it doesn't feel good because many people probably were following along with the anticipation that we were going to be competing together
Ah,
at New Zealand's
yes.
Strongest Man, and there was a very cordial invitation, which I could say publicly, that I'd be staying at Sir Helms's place in May.
I did invite you.
You
Yes.
did invite me. You're right. 90 kilo, you're competing. 80 kilo, we would have been twin champs. Kind of Michael Jackson, Paul McCartney. There's this photo of them kind of clasping hands and raising it in victory together. That could have been us. And it would have been us. And then I find out that not only do you invite Brett Gibbs into your domicile, I also find that you invite someone else, and she might be well spoken, Evie, okay, whatever. And there's a lot to learn here, and her self awareness was refreshing. But you keep inviting new people, and I still haven't been there at Casa Helms. So I want to know what's going on.
Well, first off, when was the very first time I invited you out to New Zealand, my friend?
In my head or in reality?
Well, I'll tell you what it is in reality. It
Okay.
was actually during my first trip to see you in Toronto, long before COVID.
It's true.
And you basically said, "Hey, I don't like to leave Toronto. I don't like long flights."
It's true.
And then you just started I don't know, you said something about having to change your diaper, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And I got distracted.
Right.
But essentially your whole message was, I'm a big baby. I don't
Right.
like to travel.
Right.
The value of our relationship is less than the stress I would have from traveling.
Yeah.
And it was that way for a couple years until very conveniently.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying it's a pandemic,
Woo!
but I feel like maybe someone named Omar Isuf knew
Yeah.
that there might have been something that would have prevented you to come out so that you could say you were going
Right.
to come out on the pretense.
Yeah.
And then, oh, look at that. Ooh, global pandemic. I guess I can't come out.
Guess
So
I
I
can't
think
come
it's
out.
actually reprehensible that you would put this on me when in fact you've been invited out for 3 years and you have not yet come. And now that you physically can't come, you're blaming me.
Yeah, it's just, distance makes the heart grow fonder. And sometimes, to quote the mortal band Cinderella, is it? You don't know what you got until it's gone. And I took you for granted, Eric. I took our dynamic for granted. I thought it always was going to be there, that the invitation was going to be there. And when it got removed, then I realized how much I wanted it. And so if I could become a bigger man in your presence here, I just want to say that, I won't do it again. I won't
Omar,
do it again.
You just watched our first and only fight live, and it lasted all of 40 seconds.
I can't
tops.
stay mad at you, Eric.
No, and I can't stay mad at you either. You totally redeemed yourself, and you also segued into our current guest,
Right.
Evie Corrigan. She is a junior world champion, and she was planning to go to the Sheffield to compete, and of course, the world exploded, and we all know that story. However, what you may not know is her internal struggles as a powerlifter coming from a non-athletic background. This is almost the counter story to the story of Ellis McLean and Taylor Atwood and Jessica Bittner, who we've had on, and explaining what is it like to be someone who you get introduced to powerlifting, all the good vibes, all the progressive overload likes and clicks, and all the things that drive you forward, the parallel between the social media rewards and also the rewards on the bar and all that good stuff. And then the external pressure from all of a sudden being a world champion within just a couple short years of you picking up the barbell and not having the athletic background. What does that mean? Where does that drive you? What does it mean for relatedness, competence, autonomy? How do they interact with one another? And where does one find themselves when they find the external pressure of the thing they once loved is too great to bear if they want to stay in the sport? What existential questions does that prompt? Where do you get to? And why is it that Evie today, I would venture, and I don't want to put words in her mouth, but as you listen to this podcast, you'll realize I'm probably just paraphrasing what she said.
Right.
She's more committed to the longevity of her position as an athlete in the sport than she probably ever was before, even though previously she probably put more emphasis on winning and competition than she does today.
Now, Eric, her level of introspection, and you're right, there is that existential crisis people face at a very young age, because unless I'm mistaken, she was a junior up until a few years ago. So very early.
Yep. 2020 would have been her first year competing in the Open.
So 23, 24. Are you kidding me to have this level of maturity at this point in your career? Normally, you kind of have to suffer a devastating defeat, a setback where you have to reframe things like, wait a second, I didn't achieve what I wanted. And so to hear some of these things once again from a world champion, because it's one thing, okay, we're the C-list here, okay? We love to lift. We're lifers, okay? We are going to be those people, Eric. When we talk about SDT, self-determination theory, where I see myself in the future, men's locker room. Okay, I'm 80 years old, don't have my hair, got a towel on, using a blow dryer, not for my head. That's where I see myself. So we're lifers, you and myself. You know what I mean? And so people hear from us is like, yeah, but you guys are losers. Shut up, right? To hear it from someone that level of introspection, to be a champion, because she says some things, Evie, that's refreshing, that are almost antithetical when we associate what it means to be a champion, especially as we kind of said, Eric, not to make stereotypes here, but an American champion, because, USAPL, it's very massive. A lot of the participants, the cockiness, the this, the that, like win at all cost, right? So it's like, well, wait a second, like she's a champion and she doesn't, imbue those qualities. And someone else quickly to give a shout out, and not to make this intro too long, but another person that was refreshing to see is your boy Bryce Lewis. Well, Bryce is out there crushing fools, like crushing them, listening to Taylor Swift, like everyone else is listening, like at the gates of hell, thinking like I must just do or die time, like my family will die unless I get this. And he's just jamming out to those tunes, crushing PR. So I love to hear the diversity of thought and positions amongst top level competitors, and to understand there's not just one way. And especially if you want to frame this more than just about winning, then you really need to get introspective, like how Evie got.
Yeah, well said. And the best part of this is that she's been on both sides of it. Evie has gone through a very rapid rise to prominence, getting invited to arguably the biggest competition outside of the World Games in the IPF, the Sheffield, which would have been a game changer, which unfortunately got canceled with COVID. That speaks to the quality of lifter she is. Of course, having a junior world championship does as well. But to be there so quickly at, like you said, a young age, and then to have to deal with a potential of early burnout, prompted so much introspection. And I think many are not apt to that challenge. I think we see, and we talked about this before, how few lifters remain from 5 or 6 years ago. So I do think the reason why I asked Evie to be on, and why I reached out to her, is because I think so many people will be able to relate to the struggle. And maybe somewhere along that pathway that she has traversed, and not to say the struggle is over, but this relationship with the iron changes continually, and it should, like any good relationship. It needs to evolve with the people in the relationship. And I think it's really cool to see where she was, where she started, where she went to, the risks she faced, the possibility of saying, I'm done with competing, and then to see that she's still here with a more committed relationship than ever, looking at it from a sustainable perspective. So the intention here is not to tell you that, hey, your relationship is wrong, or your perspective is wrong, or the old way is bad, the new way is in, but rather for you to find maybe there are aspects of where she's been that you can relate to, and maybe it can help you find your way forward.
Eric, you're speaking to me directly, because to bring it back to the tonic, which is our relationship, I will make that trip for you. Okay, that is the new me now. That's the new framework. I understand everything that you just said in its context as it relates to us and nothing else.
Well, at least you were listening to that portion of it, and I'm glad you're going to be out here one day.
Thank you.
And I think we all look forward to that post-COVID Omar traveling to New Zealand. I think that's when we really know we've beaten this thing. When Omar comes to New Zealand, that's when we know that COVID and all the worst parts of it, which is preventing us from seeing each other in person, are over. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. No, I'm renting a kayak this weekend. See me in about 2 years. I'll see you in about 2 years. Yeah.
Awesome. And I'll make sure to call search and rescue very quickly.
Wow. I think I've seen this image before, Eric, this side of your room. When we last saw this side of your room, honestly, I'm blanking on the guest. There's a guy, Cliff Harvey. Oh, Cliff Harvey. And there was
it would have been Brett Gibbs was the last time.
Oh, you're cheating on me with Gibbs too, so that's awkward. All right, so forget Gibbs. Okay, he's definitely a New Zealand native. That's fine. Cliff Harvey. Who was with him? I can't forget. All I know is in that episode. Who?
Danny Lennon. of Sigma Nutrition.
That is why I was fearing for my life. Okay, now it's all coming back to me. Evie, I don't know. Have you listened to that episode or any of the episodes Iron Culture where we talk about some controversy that happened?
I listened to a lot of your episodes. I will be honest and say that some of it goes over my head.
Yeah.
But I'm a big fan of the podcast.
Yep. So it's probably a good thing that went over your head, because if you were to know the true nature of Danny, which we can't get into for previous reasons that resulted in us firing ourselves back in the day. Let's just say he was here in New Zealand. And I'm glad he was here, mostly because it resulted in everyone still being around even after he left, if that makes sense.
Right. People seem to disappear shortly after interacting with Danny, Evie. It's just, it is what we've observed. And again, in a court of law, some might constitute that as being slander. All I know is that, we're thrilled to have you here. You are the third guest now, or the third podcast to be in Eric's room. And so we're joined today to talk about lifting. What we all love to do, clearly, Eric, you know us. What is it? The bench press? What's this one called? Where you do over the head?
That looks like you're doing an overhead press.
With one arm.
And then you pick
Single arm
stuff,
overhead press.
Yeah,
big 1.5.
You pick stuff off the ground or whatever. Yeah, man, lifting, it's awesome, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think we've had a few, like, if people have been tuning in lately, we've been speaking to a lot of what you would call IPF royalty, right? And you are among the royals.
Oh.
Yeah. We had Jessica Bittner on recently. For those who don't know proper German pronunciation, she's Jessica Buettner.
Yeah.
You have to say it like that. Buettner. We also had Brett Gibbs on not too long ago, because those who don't know, Brett Gibbs was in this part of New Zealand because Evie and Co. helped establish a really awesome local powerlifting seminar we had over at AET. We've also had Ellis McLean, as well as Taylor Atwood on recently.
True.
And I think we have been discussing not just, hey, what you bench, bro or sis. We've been talking about why and how, and will you continue to bench what you bench, bro or sis. So the reason why I wanted to have Evie on is not just because she's awesome, because she is, but also because she has what I would say is a relatively unique experience compared to some of the conversations we've had with, say, Jessica, Ellis, and Taylor, who have a rich athletic background. For those who remember, Jessica was in track and field. She was a thrower. Also, I believe she was a jumper. And then we had Taylor and LS, who both had pro days for the NFL and actually got on Canadian football rosters. So we have some pretty high caliber athletes, but no less high caliber of an athlete in powerlifting. Evie is a junior world champ. First time she went out there. And then first time in the Open, second place. Is that accurate? Or
I've never competed in the Open, actually.
You were
Second time in the 57 juniors.
That's right. Yeah. So she's a podium medalist, having been atop that podium once and very close to the top of the podium the second time. And that was just kind of out of the blue for you. Would you say that's accurate?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Completely unexpected.
Which I think is awesome. And it's awesome to see, but I know it's not necessarily always awesome to experience. So I guess I'd like to hear it from your mouth, which is probably the most reasonable place for you to speak from. What was it like when you first got into powerlifting?
I first got into powerlifting like almost by accident, really. And I'd never really done any kind of training before. I'd never really even played a sport before. I didn't really like exercising that much. I was kind of into yoga. So like I did yoga like maybe every couple of days, and I did acro yoga, which is like kind of partner acrobatics, sort of like, I guess you train for it, but not really even remotely in the same way, not with that like consistency and like programming that you do for powerlifting. And so I just started going with my sister and just doing it for fun. Like it was, I'll be honest and say I liked it at first because I was good at it quickly. And I'm kind of an impatient person. So I got that instant gratification of being like, oh, I like can lift stuff. Particularly the bench press. Like I was pretty good at bench to begin with, maybe strong upper body from doing lots of yoga. I don't know, but yeah, I just did it because I was having fun. I was progressing every week. It had that thing where you could continue to feel like you were improving because every week you were putting a little bit more on the bar.
Yeah, it's like social media. That's great. You get all these little feedback points.
Yeah.
Called kilos, like likes, same thing.
Yeah, well, yeah, and it just it really reels you in,
Yep. So you were a pro acro yoga competitor. You had an S&C coach, a nutritionist, a team supporting you. And I know you were very disappointed that acro yoga didn't end up in the Olympics for your rotation. So you made the transition to powerlifting.
Another non-Olympic sport.
Yeah, exactly. I like it better that way. I think the Olympics are a little too posh for us.
Yeah.
Probably too respectable.
Agreed.
Organized.
There'd be no face slapping or...
No.
The compensation that you get.
Yes.
Why get paid for doing something you love? Like, no.
True.
Who needs it?
Yeah. Nose torque, they wouldn't allow that, which is a critical part to the sport, in my opinion.
Yep.
So, yeah, I think, of course, I'm kidding for anyone who has not aware acro yoga is not an Olympic sport, nor is it...
even really a sport.
I mean, yeah, sport is a stretch, I guess.
Really? Yeah.
Did you catch that? Sport is a stretch for acro yoga? That's a pun, folks.
And this is why we're having Evie, because someone's going to laugh at Eric's dad jokes. And I love it because the first thing that Eric said to me, I picked his beautiful butt up from the airport and I said, Eric, hey, how's it going? Da-da-da. And I said, it's going to be whatever. We get there 5 o'clock, da-da-da-da, we'll train or whatever. And you said, oh, and I said, we'll have some protein. Of course, we got to get anabolic. And you're like, oh, no way. And I said, but we don't have protein powder at the house. We'll probably have to, get some chicken or whatever. And you're like, oh, no way. And I'm just like nodding along. First interaction in real life with Eric. And he's like, you didn't get that, did you? I'm like, you mean like no way as in no way? And you're like, yeah. And then I just looked at you and I reconsidered sending you back to New Zealand. But I thought he's already here. It's 23 hours. It's a long flight. Man's looking great. So Eric, what I will say real quick, the only inside scoop I want to know before we continue, because I'm loving this Rocky tier story, right? Where it's like, didn't know you had it in you. You started doing it, boom, to the tippity top. Were there any early indications? That's the only thing I want to know, Evie, about your athletic potential. So there are probably people listening to this, and it is an inspirational story, right? We've had Taylor Atwood and Ellis McLean, where it's like, yeah, that's not us, man. Where it's like, yeah, first time I bench pressed 315. I'm like, check that off. That's not us, right? Or it's like, as Eric said,
Ellis McLean benched 275 in middle school and decided to stop going up. What is that?
Yeah. So top tier athletes here, Eric. Clear pedigrees. So my question for you, Evie, was it that you didn't do any sport? So you never tested yourself to know your capabilities? Or did you do the normal things kind of growing up? Let's say like your track, your volleyball, soccer, whatever the sports that you'd play, and you always were pretty good but didn't stand out, and then just powerlifting clicked? Or was it just something where you didn't really do any physical activity besides acro yoga, soon to be in the Olympics, and then you picked up powerlifting and it took off? Like, could you just frame that for the viewers? I'm real curious on that one.
So I think, I played sport like as a kid. I played netball, which is really big here. Never really enjoyed it that much or was that good at it. I did play hockey the last year of high school. It was only like 5-a-side, and we lost every single game. I was terrible. We were all terrible. There was one good player, and I feel really bad for her because like she was stuck with the rest of us. So yeah, no early athletic ability to speak of until I started lifting weights. And then, even then, like I don't feel like I have the story of like, first time in the gym, she lifted so much. Like, not really. I think I deadlifted like 100 pretty early on, and I was like very chuffed with myself. I think maybe one of my first testing sessions, I benched like 55, which is more than body weight. So that was like, but that was probably after a few months of training still. Like,
see, that is good.
My bench was the best part to begin with, and my squat was like 75, I think, in my first testing session. So, a couple of months after training for a bit. So
let's give some frame of reference. What's your best squat, bench, and deadlift?
Now?
The best ever you've done now.
Ever.
Unless it's not the best, then just the best ever.
Well, obviously earlier in the year we were supposed to go to Sheffield. That didn't happen. And we ended up doing like a max out in the gym at North Shore Barbell here in Auckland. And I actually squatted 170 the week before, 170 kilos. And then I benched, I think the most I've benched is like 91.5 or something. Ridiculous, weird little fractional plates. And I've deadlifted 192 and a half.
It's pretty damn good.
Just shy of 200.
And Eric, let's give that frame of reference for those listening. Not only the pounds, but also it's like that squat's a damn near 3 times body weight squat, right? Because you competed at the 57 kilo, right, Evie?
Yeah, 57s.
Yeah. Bench is creeping on a 2 times body weight bench. And I mean, that deadlift, as you said, you wanted 200 kilos. It's like, that's almost, in the range 3.5 times body weight. Are you kidding me? Those are insane numbers, because someone might just hear those numbers without respect to body weight. Those are monster lifts.
Yep. And I think I love how Evie is like, well, maybe, it's like, this is exactly why I wanted to have you on, because I know your perspective. We've talked about this as far as, I think there's things culturally in New Zealand. I think there are things culturally in sport, and I think there are things that come from being rewarded in something you didn't expect to do well in, that all kind of coalesce together and making someone feel pressures that they can't really identify where they come from. As a coach, I've had the pleasure of working with a lot of athletes across a wide range of strength levels and competitive levels. And I have to say that, one of the things that a lot of us who are, I'm just going to go ahead and say it, weak, don't realize is that, yes, we look at Instagram, or we look at, we watch world level comps, or we look up to our heroes on Instagram, our lifters we really want to be like, and think, oh, it'd be so much more awesome if I was as strong as them. But I think there are additional pressures at that level of sport that some people just don't realize. And I don't know if that's something that most people anticipate. It's not like other things where you have to slowly build momentum. Like if someone is trying to get into the social media game, for example. Let's say someone's going to try to be an influenza, as you like to call them, Omar. Mm-hmm. It doesn't just happen overnight. There's a billion people out there with hot bods, or, who are,
as much as you?
Well, there's hot bods and there's hot bods.
Right. Sorry. Okay.
No, but in all seriousness, like we know you can't just be attractive and all of a sudden you have 1 million followers on Instagram. That's a slow build, and presumably you have the goal of getting a larger platform, and you're preparing yourself for that in some way, regardless of what we feel about the people who that's their goal and they use their body to do it. But I think if all of a sudden, with no prior athletic background, you come into a sport and you're like, oh, I just won nationals. Oh, I just won junior world champs. What is that experience like?
There's a lot to say about this. Yeah, like I think first of all, you get a feeling of thinking, is this a fluke? Like, do I deserve this? Like, how could this have happened so quickly, or how could this have happened at all? Like, was it accidental? Like, will I be able to do it again? And I think that was sort of the following thought after feeling like I'd reached the top of my game, I guess, so-called, based on that, like, external, reward that I was getting, winning a world championship. There was definitely a following thought process that said, well, if you're at the top of your game now, like, where do you have to go next?
Yep.
Like, is the only place to go downwards? Am I only going to get worse now? Like, do I have to continue to win world championships from this point onwards to be considered still a strong lifter
Absolutely. Yeah, there's not a ton of external graded steps for lifters in powerlifting at all. We've talked about that before, how sometimes like if you were to play sport in like high school and then uni in the States, or just like rec league or semi-pro, and then go pro, and eventually you do better as a pro athlete. In most sports, they give this nice graded step. Like no one who's playing as a 14-year-old, like the under 14 soccer, you're not thinking like, why am I not as good as Pele? But in powerlifting, because you start as an adult and you're on Instagram, the first time you lift, you're comparing yourself to some of the best in the world,
Yeah.
So it's difficult. Like I know, and I don't want to discredit some of the attempts by some people involved in powerlifting who are trying to make like regionals a thing in the States and have qualifying totals. Like we have like the different qualifying totals and all that. But for the most part, it's kind of like qualify for nationals and then fight to place harder in nationals and maybe one day compete internationally to move up the ranks. So I think to come into it and find out that you're, oh crap, I'm already at the world-class level, it does remove some of those reward mechanisms. You know, I sometimes I think like, what if Evie had been introduced to this without competition, but you really love pushing yourself? You might find yourself totaling 10, 15, 20 kilos more than the current junior champ, but have no idea, and you would still be able just to focus on progression.
It's really bizarre having that. I mean, I think powerlifting is like a smaller sport, and there's always that voice in your head that says like, oh, but like hardly anyone competes, or like it's not that big of a deal if you do well, or like, especially I think in New Zealand, like the competition is not as deep. Like you can kind of end up almost all of a sudden being like the best in the country for your weight class and being like, I don't know how that happened.
Yeah.
I forgot what I was going to say there, but
Yeah.
It can happen quite quickly. I don't think it's the same as in the States where you really have to fight. And I've heard lots of people say before about like USAPL Nats is like more competitive than Worlds, and like winning that is more difficult than maybe winning a world championship. And yeah, it's not comparable in New Zealand. Like we're definitely growing really fast, but you can quite quickly find yourself at the top and be in two minds about it, like, oh yeah, cool, like I must be really good, and then be like, oh, but maybe like there's just not that many people, or it's a lucky year for me, or without that competition setting, it doesn't give you wouldn't have that sort of frame of reference. You'd just be like, I'm this strong, and I will continue to get stronger because I want to. Yep.
It almost sounds, when I'm listening to you, I don't want to put words in your mouth, I'm curious, it sounds like sometimes at times you felt like your success it's uncertain. Like you're not standing on anything firm. You know, like, is this just because New Zealand's not competitive? Is the world's really that competitive? And was this a fluke, like you said before? So have you found that you're at odds with your own expectations as far as what level of confidence you should have?
100%. Yeah. All the time. Yeah. I'd say like one of the biggest challenges for me is self-belief and like convincing myself that I should be where I'm at, or that like I deserve the success that I have, or even just trying to remove that the external rewards from my training and my progress and like what I get out of it.
Yeah. Yeah, that totally makes sense. And one thing, so this is something that I have seen as an American coming into New Zealand culture. And I think everyone kind of knows the stereotypical American athlete. There is a certain level of swagger, boasting, confidence that is there. And that's not just in sport, if we're honest. Like an undeserved level of confidence is kind of characteristic of the stereotypical American. That's not, of course, not true across the board. It's a huge melting pot of people with diverse cultures and regional differences. But one thing I appreciate about New Zealand, and this is just my perspective, I don't want to paint a broad brush across New Zealand culture either, is that people don't default into, of course I'm good enough, of course I'm confident. It seems like confidence is hard-earned and humility is kind of baked into the culture. There's the tall poppy syndrome, for those who don't know what that is. It's like, if you're going to stand out, you need to do it in a really respectful way. And I think I find a lot of people struggle to feel like they deserve what they have, which I think speaks to their character. But of course, everything's a double-edged sword. Like, confidence is great. Undeserved confidence might leave you in a position where you're actually not competent in a position of authority, for example. Never happens in the United States, but I could see that being plausible.
Theoretically,
yeah, theoretically, that could be a problem. You think about it logically. So how much do you think some of your upbringing and just the fact that you're from New Zealand, do you think that interacts with some of your experiences?
Totally. I think, I recognize the same thing in New Zealand culture. It's a very central part of New Zealand culture. Like, people are just like that here, it's not seen as a good thing to sort of talk yourself up and like parade your achievements. You should be humble, and you should be, I guess, self-critical to a certain extent as well, and willing to say like, oh yeah, like I did well, but here's all these other people who also did well, and like, yeah, it's definitely a big part of New Zealand. And I suppose I feel like it's maybe part of being female as well to a certain degree. Like I don't know, like maybe other people would disagree with that, but I think that a kind of confidence and cockiness comes quite readily to a lot of men, especially male competitors that I've met. Like, I feel like, at least from what I can see, which is, you know, limited, I don't know what's going on behind the facade, but from what I can see, it seems to be that there is more self-belief, or at least outwardly they put on a persona of like, yeah, like I'm good, and like I deserve this, and I back myself 100%, whereas maybe I'm allowed to show a bit more weakness, if you will. Vulnerability is definitely a better word. Yeah.
Evie, they're crumbling on the inside. Let me just say, when you said it's superficially confident, you think that they're like, I'm so excited for this. Meanwhile, their hands are like this, you know, just shaking.
Yeah.
You know, so one of the taglines of Iron Culture is history, science, culture. And I think even though it's definitely changing, because I personally don't identify with, like, I don't see my lifting accomplishments as an extension of my manhood. But man, that is something that goes back to the roots of it.
Yeah.
You know, so if you look at stone lifting in various cultures, that was something where it's like, this is an expression of your ability to do manual labor, which is traditionally a male thing. So like they had manhood stones, you know, like if you can lift the biggest stone, then you can go on a ship that voyages further. And I mean, it maybe it made sense at one time where we needed manual labor to be done by men, and then, okay, well, someone has to do the other things and all that. But I think that kind of notion was pervasive far past a point when you could even make an argument that it made sense anthropologically. Like there's Bob Hoffman. He's a great example. So he came around in the 30s, and he was a legend of the iron game, as far as not as a lifter himself, but as creating a kind of the York Barbell Club, the Strength and Health magazine, and pushing American weightlifting forward. And he's kind of the grandfather of American weightlifting, if you will, and powerlifting as well. And his thing was all about, this is about American manliness, you know? So I think that while that has died off a lot in multiple decades of time, it's still kind of baked into male culture, you know?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of masculinity that rests on that sort of ability to be strong in whichever sense that is. Like, it may be physically strong, it may be, you know, emotionally strong. And I think it's interesting now as we see powerlifting expanding and including more women, and how we maybe have to redefine what that strength means, because, oh, well, if being strong is a manly thing, then like, what do you do with female powerlifters? And when, I guess, I don't experience it that often, but I have seen it on social media, men who become
bitter,
triggered by by female strength,
jealous, intimidated. Yeah.
Oh, I'm not jealous. You know, the only logical thing, Evie, someone can do when you clearly see someone lift more than you is try and point out a difference, chastise them, ostracize them, and do anything you can to make yourself feel better by belittling them. That's kind of like the framework, I'd say, the go-to tactic. So
it's just a demonstration of strength. That's strength, is it not?
Evie, what did you say?
I said that's just a demonstration of strength. That's your like social media strength.
That's right.
Yeah.
I'm so strong
bullying.
that I can make myself feel better.
Yeah.
Flexing your keyboard muscles.
Now, Eric, I'll say it's very interesting what you just said, associating, not disassociating, you know, your manhood from your lifting. This is actually an interesting topic of conversation. And I could say, I've said this before a little bit, but my main inspiration, athletic inspiration, is my mom. My mom is a freak of an athlete, and all those traditional, let's say in quotations, masculine qualities, stoic, confident, tough as nails, like all those things, that's actually my mom. My father's line would be, I'm a lover, not a fighter, right? And so growing up, my inspiration, I want to be like my mom. And she's the person that, once again, won a city track finals, just a really, really, really good athlete. And so my inspiration growing up was that. And so that's why I think some of my tongue-in-cheek nature you'll see in general in the videos and all those things is coming into that space, or coming into some of these spaces and seeing some of the bravado that would exist just amongst kind of the guys. Like, all right, like, you're peacocking here right now. I understand, like, we're just lifting. It's fine. Kind of disarming it a little bit has been interesting. And it has been an interesting, I don't know if you feel the same way, Eric, because we've been lifting Evie. We've been trying to make it a Worlds. It's not happening for us. Well, I'm not saying it's not happening, but it's, Eric.
I've gone as a coach.
It counts.
Yeah,
Wait, Eric,
it counts.
Eric,
I really think it does.
Dog, you're my coach. What do you, like, it's fine for you to say.
Hey, your coach has
Yeah.
gone to Worlds.
Oh.
Congratulations.
Oh, man, that's sick. Yo, I'm real proud
Gotta
of you, Eric.
reframe that shit. Yeah. Thank you.
I don't know if you found this, though, just that quick comment, kind of how people frame things or lifting or what it means to them or part of their identity. But I could say that earlier on, when it comes to powerlifting, it was a male-dominated space. And it was seen once again as being masculine, where it's normal, you slap yourself, you hype yourself up. You're thinking of like war, conquest, all these things. Pillaging is like, okay, cool. What? Like, these are just the things that were spoken about. And I got to give a shout out to Sean, who has made a very egalitarian setup at Fortis and very welcoming to people that I'd say traditionally might not be interested into strength sports at that time. So women and just people that, like, once again, you might not think, oh, you're into powerlifting. It's like, actually, man, it's like, I kind of like playing, ultimate frisbee. He's like, hey, cool, like, come in here, like, we're gonna teach you how to squat, like, anyone of any discipline. And so there's been that, and we had that conversation, the changing face of powerlifting overall. But do you find that, Eric, for yourself, where you questioning and disassociating where your manliness from your lifting? Do you see that in the spaces that you're in, where it's kind of a shift over time from maybe like 8 years ago to the last few years, and now it seems to be a lot better? But you tell me.
Yeah, I do think it's changed tremendously, and I think, and this is a, so I'll give a little insight into my own upbringing. My mom is a marriage and family therapist. Those who know, my father passed away, I will say, because of depression, and so I always found it tragic to me that he wasn't able to express himself. And I'm not going to say that's completely because of some of the pressures we believe or buy into because of our gender, but I've always, some of the men in my life who I see as the strongest and who've been the best examples for me are those who are able to express vulnerability, connect with people, and then acknowledge their weaknesses, because then that allows them to have the courage to show what is typically not seen as strength, and then that actually allows them to shore up their weaknesses. And I think that's something, that's just one example where I think we can reframe some of the things we're taught as being a certain way in a way that's probably more adaptive or facilitative. And I think there's nothing inherently wrong with having a lot of those qualities you described in powerlifting, of having it being about conquest, war, all that. Those are inherently competitive, and we associate those things with males sometimes culturally, but there's no reason they have to be male qualities in my mind. And I think if we look at the qualities as a way of saying, hey, these can be positive, and they may be your jam, but they may not be mine. And you may associate them with your gender identity, and I may not. I think that's okay. Like, I don't have any problem with someone who came from a culture where they connect with, let's say, their Scottish identity or their Scandinavian identity, and they go, hey, I do like the idea of manhood stones. But you can make that something that's inclusionary and not exclusive. You can say, or this could be, womanhood stones. Or they could just be stones of empowerment, or whatever the hell you want to call it, you know? And I think one thing I always appreciated about powerlifting, at least what I've been exposed to, and it's probably easy for me to say this as a dude, because I never felt excluded, but I've never felt pressured into a certain mold. I definitely felt that I didn't fit the mold early on, but I'm hanging out with all these like people who on the street, you think they're part of a biker gang, and they're totally cool with this, this very non-stereotypical powerlifter being part of the powerlifting crew. And the only thing that I needed to have entrance into the quote-unquote club was working hard and loving to lift heavy and supporting everybody, So I think, and I'm sure, like I said, I'm not going to see it when there is exclusionary attitudes in powerlifting, because I'm not someone who would probably be excluded. But I feel like it's gotten more representative, more inclusionary, and because of that, the culture of powerlifting has changed. But I think the fact that it's been able to get that way probably speaks to the fact that for the most part, and Evie, I'd love to get your thoughts on this, there hasn't been like a, hey, you don't want to die in a bar fight? You can't be part of powerlifting mentality, you know?
Right.
So anyway, I think it's changed a lot. And I think, but I do think on the whole, powerlifting is one of the more accepting communities that I've seen. I don't know what your thoughts on that are.
Yeah, I really agree. I mean, I can't speak obviously to like the earlier days of powerlifting. I haven't been in the sport that long, but one of the initial things that really attracted me to it was the community and this attitude of inclusivity. And it is a sport that's sort of set up to be for everyone, because there's a weight class for everyone. There is an age category for everyone, which is, definitely one of the great things about it. And obviously women are invited to compete, and we do. Lots of us do now, more so. And I think as more and more women come into the sport, it does sort of, redefine what powerlifting is. It's not a thing for like super jacked. Well, you can be a super jacked dude and like you're welcome to be, but you can also not be. You could be a smaller guy if you want to be. You can be a bigger guy. You can be kind of whoever you want, and you will be welcome to compete in this sport. I guess the only aside I would say is there is definitely still some parts, I think, of the community where there are maybe hangovers of like a previous mentality of strength and masculinity as being tied together.
Right. Yeah. And I think especially when you see it on Instagram or social media in general, where you can be victim to an attack on your gender because you're too strong, Like, I think that's a very obvious, it still exists. I don't know how prevalent it is. Again, I'm not the one who's going to be at the receiving end of such comments.
I think not so much within the community. It's sort of outside it, right? Yeah. So it can I think you sort of almost end up in this like nice bubble where you're like, man, everyone respects each other, and like being at powerlifting comps is awesome. At least in New Zealand, I don't know what it's like overseas, but I've always found competing in New Zealand to be such a lovely experience. Like everyone is so supportive of each other. They're really like, people are competitive, but it's not a nasty competitiveness. And I've heard this compared to other sports, where people come from other sports and say like, man, powerlifting's so nice. Like everyone supports each other. Everyone cheers for each other. Like, everyone's willing to help you. And there isn't tearing each other down. But I think, maybe some of that exists outside of the sport with people looking in and being like, chicks lifting weights, like, oh, she's too big.
Absolutely. No, I think, I appreciate that perspective. I think it's something that we need to be aware of. It's great that we have this positive bubble, but it is also good to be aware of when you're in a bubble, So one thing I'd like to talk about now is, so we compared lifting and being able to set incremental PRs to that same kind of reward mechanisms that video games or social media has, and how you might have actually had less stress if it was just the garage championships of Evie Corrigan. At least, when I mean have more success, I mean in terms of not struggling with what does it mean, what's my motivation. So I'd love to hear from you now. What has been some of the challenges with that success, and have you found that your motivation has shifted from being intrinsic to extrinsic? Is that a battle? Is that something? How have you made sense of that?
Yeah, it's definitely, first off, when I first won Worlds and I was over the moon and it was awesome. And then after that, my first comp after 2018 Worlds was Nationals in Whangarei up north in New Zealand. And I just remember it was so strange because it felt like it came on so quickly, but like this pressure I had to do better than I'd done at Worlds. I was like, what kind of world champion am I if I don't go to Nationals and lift more? Right. And I had a number goal and Wilks, when Wilks points were still a thing. I had a Wilks points goal for that comp, and I put so much pressure on myself, and I think I convinced myself that it was other people putting pressure on me. Yeah. I was like, oh, everyone will think that I'm not strong if I don't lift more. People won't think that I deserve to be a world champion if I don't lift more at Nationals, And I think most of it was actually my own pressure and feeling like I wasn't worthy of the championship if I couldn't continue to improve and continue that rate of progression I'd have up until that point. And I definitely, that was probably, it wasn't that bad of a comp in terms of my actual performance. Like, I didn't hit the goals that I wanted, and I was so cut up about it. But I think in terms of like my headspace, that was probably one of my worst comps. I was just so nervous because there was so much pressure that I'd put on myself, and I didn't enjoy it at all. The whole time I was like pacing. I couldn't calm down. I was so so nervous about every single lift. And that kind of continued for a while, that relationship with competing and feeling like I had something to prove. I did. That was the same again for Auckland's the following year in 2019, and I felt that I didn't perform well enough to like even post about it. Like it was terrible, and like people would be ashamed, and like she's not a real world champion. And it was. I started to realize that this relationship with competing and this pressure that I was putting on myself was ruining my relationship with powerlifting. Like, to only do it to feel like you have to prove that you're strong enough to be worthy of the attention that you're getting. Like, this whole thing, I was like, man, that's so not what it's about.
Yeah.
And I kind of had to start addressing all of those thoughts and picking apart this idea that I'd built up about like, well, you have to do this to be able to do this, to be able to be worthy of this, and that people will think that you're this person that I thought that people thought that I was.
Like the layers of the intricacies of that, and I probably have to wipe that slate clean, was probably a multi-step process. I wonder, was there a point when you considered walking away from the sport, or at least from competing?
Yeah, I didn't want to compete anymore. I still wanted to train, and I'm not sure if that was entirely just for my love of training or if I just wasn't ready to give it up, because I think there was a part of me that was like, you're a powerlifter, like this is your identity, like maybe you'll never be as good at powerlifting as, like, maybe you'll never be as good at anything else as you are at powerlifting, which is like a thing to to be like, I must continue with this sport because it's the only thing I'm good at, which is not true. I'm a person outside of powerlifting as well. And I think part of that idea of like, oh, well, I can't leave the sport because then I won't progress. I won't be making gains. It'll all be for nothing. But yeah, I definitely didn't want to compete for a while. And until at least I'd worked out this thing going on in my head about, the pressure to perform and putting that on myself.
Dude, I think there's probably a lot of people who relate to that to a level that is like, I'm sure there's a lot of people nodding their heads. I can think of people who I know are nodding their heads.
I hope so.
Yeah, it's such a common experience, because what you're talking about is a number of layered concepts. So there's athletic identity, and so the athletic identity literature, when you look at that in the science, it's normally about injury, where someone from often a young age is rewarded, and they are seen that they are given, they achieve competence and they achieve relatedness, which are two aspects of self-determination theory, how we make sense of, do I have value and am I happy, And so they associate, this is a part of me that gives me value in the group. This is the part of me that gives me competence, and this gives me purpose in life. And it's not that they should have done something different, but they get injured and they have no time to prepare for the shift. And now all of a sudden I can't be competent. Therefore, I cannot be part of this group because I cannot be an athlete. And it's not just, crap, well, I better go get a job. It's, who am I? Which is a much harder existential crisis than the decision to, go back to school or figure out what you're going to do, etc.
It's a slippery slope, like attaching so much of your identity and your self-worth and your, how you value yourself as a person to this thing. And I mean specifically not just powerlifting, but being world champion or being the best of the best or being, the national champion. And if you attach so much to this this thing that is very arbitrary and kind of fickle, like you don't have any control over that. You're in this very vulnerable position to suddenly lose that and not know what to do with yourself.
It's a risky place to be, you know, and it's funny because you can juxtapose that against all the potential positives, that it's not either or, they actually happen at the same time. Like, I don't want to speak for you, but I imagine that getting into powerlifting, seeing that you were so strong was probably empowering, probably built some self-efficacy, probably built some self-esteem, but also you finding yourself in this position where it's like, oh my God, and if I don't do that, I don't have those things, who am I? And I think it's this, there's a way to frame powerlifting which can emphasize those strengths, or any sport really, it doesn't just extend to powerlifting. And there's a way to frame it which can be probably too much focused on the fact that this is all, like, I have to do this. And it sounds like that's where you were.
Yeah, and I'd lost sight of the things that I'd gained in powerlifting. And I should, like you said, I should really speak about those a little bit, because I don't want people to think it was all like, oh, poor me, it was so hard, like doing well in powerlifting and winning things. Yep. Like, oh, what a tough time. Like, I learned so much coming into powerlifting, and I gained so much self-confidence that I didn't have before. I was much happier with my body. I had a better relationship with my body, like, which is a big thing for a lot of powerlifters, I think, coming into it. I had like a routine in my life for once. I had things that I was like, I've never been very good at sticking to things, but this is the longest I've ever stuck with anything. I learned that commitment and determination. And I suppose but there was that flip side of like, I've gained all of these things, and, you know, what if I lose that? You know, I think part of that confidence was attached to being good at powerlifting.
Absolutely. Yeah. You know, it's a funny thing, if I can wax philosophically and scientifically a little bit here about self-determination theory, which, you know, I kind of brought up. It's basically this theory that I think has a lot of support, and it makes intuitive sense, and it kind of plays out. I'm sure it's imperfect, you know. All models are wrong, but some are useful. So we have relatedness, autonomy, and competence as kind of the key three aspects that give human beings purpose and meaning in life, right? And I think when that model is presented in that manner, you think of it as three independent pillars. But I think that's actually a really reductionist and potentially overly simplistic, to the point of missing out on key things, way of looking at that model. I don't dispute SDT, but I think people will often chase relatedness or chase competence to the point that it can degrade autonomy. So here's what I mean by that. Once you have decided, like, to have this relatedness, to be a part of the powerlifting community, to be a powerlifter, I've got to improve my total. I've got to show that to be related, I've got to still be Evie the world champ. And now all of a sudden, your autonomy is actually gone, because you're no longer trying to do what you love for the love of whatever brought you into it. You're doing it because you're trying to be part of a group.
Yeah. You lose that power a little bit, like,
absolutely,
when you are completely driven by sort of external factors rather than internal gratification from it, or, you know, your own personal fulfillment.
Absolutely. And I think humans, inherently being social creatures, a lot of the external drive to do something. It's related to achievement, it's related to winning, but I think for many people, winning and achievement and success all comes down to relatedness. It comes to being, am I socially acceptable? Like, do people love me, damn it? Because if you love me, then I can love myself, you know? Yeah. And I think that's one of those interesting inversions where the relatedness you can get from a sport interacts with your own self-view and self-identity, and it can actually suppress your own autonomy. And then all of a sudden you look up one day and you're doing the thing you love, not for reasons that are coming from you.
No. Yeah.
And that's why I could totally understand how you're like, well, I don't want to compete anymore because that's just messing me up mentally, but I want to stop lifting because that's something that's giving me this good juice. Like, this is making me feel awesome and better and empowering. So how do I give up this thing where I feel like people are making me be a certain way, but still keep this piece of my identity that gave me self-efficacy? And I think that push and pull is unfortunately the reason why a lot of lifters who were around, say, 5-6 years ago are not anymore, but hopefully are still lifting. So
there's a point where you ask yourself, why am I doing this? Like, what do I do this for? And I think having that own reflection has now made me very aware of what other people are doing, and I sort of I don't question them, I ask myself, I wonder why they're doing it.
Yeah.
And I see the same patterns in other people as well, where there's so much a need to chase this external goal at the expense of their own personal fulfillment. I think there's this idea that, achieving that external goal will give me personal fulfillment. And I think, yeah, but at what cost?
Yes.
Like, it's not, is that the reason you got into powerlifting in the first place? To be the best of the best? I don't know if that's why many people actually start. Like, we start because it's fun and we enjoy, improving, and we enjoy hanging out with our friends in the gym and like having a good time, and like it helps us to relax and sleep better and eat well. And all of those things sort of get pushed aside as like lame reasons. And like, here's the thing, like, I want to bench as much as the world record holder, even though I've only just started powerlifting. Yes. And, putting all that pressure on yourself then makes it work and not what you started with, which was a fun hobby. And I think sometimes it is work, you do have to put in work to get better, but it shouldn't come to a point where you're like, every single session is like hard slog, and like I don't really enjoy it, but I think I try to convince myself I am.
Absolutely. And Omar, this is why I wanted Evie on, because I think asking that question of why do I lift? What is my motivation to do this? And how identifying that you're not hardcore, you're not serious if you weren't doing it to win, or just to get, even sometimes I have to beat my old PRs, which is an inversion of winning. It's just now you're competing against yourself, which is, in my opinion, a step in the right direction, yeah. But it's not getting there all the way. And like when you talk to someone who's in that phase, like, because I'll speak about this from the coaching perspective, the key is to figure out a way for someone to have value in competing, to value competition, but not only for winning. And a lot of people go like, well, I would never compete if I didn't want to win. And it's like, it's not either or. You don't have to choose to either compete or not based on whether you want to win. You could see it as, hey, this is a challenge because I have to be strong on this date that I don't dictate. There's going to be official referees that validate externally and says, yes, you did lift that. I have to make a peaking cycle. I have to get my nutrition right. I have to weigh. I have to use calibrated plates. I have to do it under pressure. I don't know if someone's going to misload the bar. I don't know if the person in front of me is going to flag their lift and I'm going to have to go a minute earlier. And it's basically saying, hey, this is an opportunity for me to see if I've really got it. Can I make it all come together? And it's the same thing, and I think people understand this more in bodybuilding, because bodybuilding is so subjective that it's easier to get here. It's going, well, you know what, like, I can always see if I can get my peak right. Can I get in shredded condition? I think people are able to articulate it a little better, but for some reason, when it's powerlifting, when it's numbers focused, when it's an analytical perspective, and it's like, why would I compete? I could just do an Instagram total. And it's like, you don't have to only have intrinsic or extrinsic motivation. It's not that extrinsic is bad. Is that extrinsic can blind you to your own intrinsic motivation. So as a coach, I'm always going, okay, how can I help this person who's incredibly competitive in terms of their mindset, may or may not be competitive externally, manage these two things and have them work together? And I don't think that's easy, and I don't think we have a lot of models, at least in Western culture, of what does that person look like? What is their attitude towards training? Who do I emulate? Because we put up Michael Jordan, or we put up all these other athletes, and I don't know that there's really good archetypes that we can, as a culture, look to and go, oh, that's the way to compete. This person has a really good balanced perspective.
I really agree with that. I think we have this false idea about what a champion looks like and what a champion mindset is and what a champion does. I think people assume like, oh, I've got to be like the most competitive. I've got to work the hardest. I've got to like be in the gym 24/7. And I think all of the other very important aspects of training kind of go out the window in favor of absolutely destroying yourself because you think that that's what a champion does. Like, a champion gives 100% all of the time. And no matter how much I try to tell people, I'm like, I don't think that's either sustainable or even accurate. I don't think that, like, yes, you have to work hard. Like, obviously it's not easy. You can't do it without having to, like, consistently train, but it's not, my training is more important than everything else in my life, and I pay no attention to the other factors. Like, they're not that important. Sleeping enough, eating well, like, managing my stress. Like, that goes out the window, and you're like, if I just train really, really hard all the time, like, that's what a champion is. Like, there's, like, super competitive. And I don't think that's true. Maybe.
Well, I mean, and even if it was, then that's actually how I get my foot in the door with these conversations with athletes who do have that mentality, is I have to start. I have to meet them where they're at. Like, if they're entirely focused on winning and performance and optimizing things, and they're not really open to the idea of taking a more holistic approach, examining why they lift, looking at how that's not productive, I can't ask them to have a philosophy they don't have yet. Yeah. I can't say, hey, well, what about the importance is your job as a husband? Or it's like, no, powerlifting is more important than those things to me right now, whether I admit it or not, or sacrifice to win, or whatever the mentality is. The foot in the door is to say, hey, if you get more life stress, that's going to negatively affect your performance. So now all of a sudden I've kind of opened up that philosophy to the idea that, the best performance comes from being more holistic. And then they finally start paying attention to other aspects of their life, and they can re-examine their values. And then they're open to the conversation of, well, now here's maybe a different life perspective to where powerlifting can enhance your performance as a human in addition to on the platform. And, the funny thing is that when you look at individual sport, and less about competitive sports or team sports where you're actually going head to head, there is an opponent. I do think that that's actually a debilitative mindset. Most of the time when I look at high level athletes who are like lifters, track athletes, individual sport competitors, and there was a really good paper so I'm not just like, this is not just my opinion, this is also something based in something. There was a really cool interview with world champion Olympic athletes, and most Olympic sports are individual sports. And if you look at the majority of the athletes in this paper, the majority of them were in individual sports, not with a direct opponent, or it's like, winning this competition doesn't matter, did I break the world record kind of thing. And most of them had a very holistic view of how to set up their life so that it had, I don't know if balance is the right word, but that nothing detracted from anything else, so that they could be a grounded person and put forth effort, and so that they could be, like you said, consistent rather than everything's about sacrifice. So because if you really think about it, if you don't take kind of like this siloed view of, competition as a single part of life and everything else is subservient to it, that's just not how the way anything works.
No. And you're going to run into problems at some point down the track and realize, I think, that you've sacrificed everything for, especially if, and sometimes it does happen, is you get injured or the competition doesn't go well and you're like, but I put everything into this. I sacrificed everything else in my life for this one thing. Then what are you left with? You feel like you've lost everything. It can feel like just such a huge loss. So I think it's so unsustainable to think that way. Like, you're not going to last very long in the sport if you behave that way.
Absolutely. Omar, I want to shift. I have a question to you. I want to frame it first because you've worked with clients over time. We've had discussions about some of the barriers to just your average person who comes to the gym, hires a personal trainer, and a big part of the reason, one of their motivations, it's often weight loss, and which often is in the form of, I don't look the way society says is acceptable. I'm not healthy. This is bad for me. I need to change. I'm broken. You know the tools to fix it. Help me. And these people generally have the same kind of relationship with exercise that lifters get to before they drop out of the sport. They start doing it because I love lifting, and they get to this point where I have to lift to be a world champion, to be accepted by my peers, to earn what I have, and I've got to improve. And I think that's an unfortunate thing that in the West happens. Like, we start playing sports in high school or even earlier than that for fun, and man, people look down on having fun or having a hobby as a sport, but I played so hard that I would be like ready to throw up or be out of breath when I was just playing. Some of the pickup basketball games and the level of exertion I put forth, I've thrown up from playing when you really think about it as a young kid. So I think that's what we teach kids. It's like, hey, it's about the competitiveness, but in a healthy way, learning how to push yourself very hard and having self-efficacy and self-belief. And then all of a sudden there's this one point where exercise becomes like flossing. It's something you're supposed to do. You probably don't. Your dentist is going to yell at you, and you're a bad person, or you're unhealthy, or you're failing because you're not doing it. And then they come to personal trainers with that same kind of relationship, and they're expecting like, oh, the personal trainer crushed me, and like you have to almost fight against that as a personal trainer because they buy into it. They want you to be the person who punishes them for being fat. And which is crazy, you know, and I think so. It's this kind of two-way street where trainers don't really get their clients because they love training. Their clients don't, and they will never keep training if they don't love it. So it's ironic to me that the thing that burns out athletes is this archetypal athlete mentality that is probably not even real. It's just this kind of subsection that we glorify, and it's the same thing that prevents our clients as personal trainers and the general population from having a lifestyle of fitness, that it's this obligation. It's like flossing. It's I have to hurt myself, and therefore I will then look acceptable. And then I can't stick with it. I don't look good, so therefore I'm weak, and you kind of erode your self-efficacy. So Omar, I'd love to hear from you. How do you think this is something that you've dealt with as a personal trainer, or how does this affect general population clients outside of sport?
Woo, Eric, there's a lot to unpack there. I do think it depends upon the psychological makeup of the client, and they're not a monolith. I'm going to assume here we're talking about both my experience and what I saw working as a trainer, managing trainers, the people that typically come in that can afford personal training. I would say that on average, you do see a lot of broken individuals. And what I mean when I say broken, they're looking to fix something because they think something's wrong with them. And they're usually at a stage of their life where they're unhappy, both with themselves, how they look, their physical expression. So how they look is actually an expression of mentally something that's been going on for quite some time. So either, erratic eating behaviors, feelings of self-worth, self-sabotage. And you're right, Eric, when you said that essentially there is this assumption of a slightly masochistic element that is desired, where it's like, I want to be punished essentially for being naughty. Like I'm overweight. I want to lose the weight. I want to feel like I'm throwing up because I want to feel that pain to know I'm putting in X amount of work. And so rewinding that and reframing it is the first order of business that I think any good personal trainer has to do. I think empathy is one of the key hidden qualities of being a good trainer, to understand their psychological motivation, what is actually driving them, and how can you change that so it's a little bit more sustainable. And we've had these conversations before, talking about either our clients or just working as a personal trainer. And we've spoken about that concept of the, in quotations, rent a friend, where sometimes it's like, I can't do this alone. I want a shoulder kind of to cry on, to lean on, all those things. And I think we both agreed essentially that we want eventually someone to reach that stage of self-sufficiency, and the reframing that occurs with people when they come in because they think they're broken, they think something's wrong, they're unhappy with themselves either because of the external pressures, internal pressures, a combination of both, is to reframe for me essentially kind of like a little bit what we're saying here with powerlifting, that essentially it's a natural function of the body to move. So a way that we're disarming it slowly. So disarming some of those preconceived notions. So I need to do this, I need to floss. It's like, well, actually, if you think about it, even as children growing up, recess, I would hasten, to say this, but I personally feel that most kids like to exercise in some capacity during recess. So you see them running around. And as a natural part of our life, it's a natural function. We play different sports, different activities. And somehow that drops off over time. We're supposed to become more academically inclined. So we, fall by the wayside, high school, getting out of that. And so the concept of play, shout out to Chip Conrad. And I think there's through threads you see amongst trainers that have just done it long enough. It's like any other job that someone does, the skill acquisition. And it's like, what are people really asking me here? When they say, I'm unhappy with myself, how do I fix it? It's like, well, what are we really talking about here? We're talking about the physical self, your personal perception of yourself, the things that you do to yourself to then make you hate yourself. You know what I mean? It's like you eating that food late at night as almost some sort of punishment mechanism. So a lot to unpack, but I think bringing the novel concept of play back, or that it's a natural function of what you need to do, and then kind of empowering them. And that's why when I came up with the whole concept, you spoke about that, and Evie spoke about her relationship with her body, when I first came up with the concept of Peach Boys, even now, so social media, I'll just give an example. A lot of things, once again, are tongue-in-cheek because it's easier than directly telling someone something, oftentimes, right, with a little bit of humor, that a lot of thick boys, a lot of boys getting into powerlifting, they start lifting, they start squatting, their jeans, they stop fitting, they got thick thighs, and now they get self-conscious because here they are, they're trying to, build a better body, and suddenly they can't fit into traditional clothes. So normalizing that concept, calling it Peach Boy, it's like, no, you're thick and no, you got glutes, bro, and like kind of a positive affirmation could really change things. And I think doing that with clients or making them understand that there isn't an end point for them. If you want to do this, it should be a sustainable part of what they do, right? A natural function. And it doesn't matter if it's an organized participation, barbell movements or whatnot, or if someone, honestly, it's like, I got a lot of clients after I was done training with them, they'd pick up other activities, swimming, walking, hiking, Tai Chi. It doesn't really matter. It's like moving their body. And so I think it's the reframing of things that is the first catalyst to true change, rather than just kind of putting a Band-Aid on a gunshot wound. Oh, okay, like you're unhappy with yourself? Don't worry, it's time to starve yourself thin. Let's feel terrible for 3 months, and then by the end of it, you'll feel like you've been missing out so much that you'll just relapse, and then it's the whole cycle over, and then you feel that you're worth nothing because, oh wait, I achieved the physique that I wanted, but then somehow I self-sabotage. Wait a second here. So the success, or the individuals I saw with the highest success, they're able to successfully change their mindset first, and then after that, everything else followed. And I don't think I'll say real quick, kind of maybe to echo what Evie was saying. I don't think there's anything wrong when you first start lifting, or when either becoming a world champion like Evie, or just someone casually getting into it, to get those natural reward mechanisms like, oh, I lost a few pounds, my coworkers at work are giving me compliments. That's natural, right? It's kind of how do you say, a mixture of all these different things coming together, coalescing to form something, and then the ratio and what it means over time should shift. And I think anyone that's been in it a long enough period of time sees that. So that'd be my answer on that one.
And it's a great answer. And it's actually, I'm glad you mentioned Chip Conrad, because some of this stuff is things that I've known, that I've been able to understand better through some of his framing. And so I think I brought this up because of what you said, Evie, about how like each session becomes a slog. Like it requires willpower. And that is, to me, I think that is such an important like early warning system for an athlete. Like I think it does happen sometimes. Don't get me wrong. Like I think bodybuilding is such a useful example because your whole life has to get negatively affected to some degree, and the thing you love becomes hard all the time, and there's no way around it, and that has to become worth it. But I think so. Here's the parallel and why I brought up personal training. The typical trope that the trainer is pressured to buy into, but only can truly help their client long term if they reframe it, like you said, Omar, is that the client basically comes to you and says, I know what I need to do. I don't have the willpower to do it. I need your willpower. So the idea is that, okay, I hate going to the dentist. I don't floss. So I basically need to go to the dentist 3 times a week and just have him just clean my teeth. It sounds awful. And that's why people don't stick with it. So when you say I need more willpower, the implicit assumption is that for me to train, I have to force myself to do it. And they have probably tried forever to force themselves to exercise. They've maybe even got a few years in a row of pure just like white knuckling determination, discipline. Ironically, we view someone who is, say, with obesity as having no discipline, but they're basically having this relationship where they have to force themselves to do all this crap, to do what tells them will be socially acceptable. And then when they finally are at the end of the rope of their discipline or their determination, or maybe they feel like it's their knowledge, they go to a trainer and they say, hey, I need your help. I need you to be the person. When I'm too tired to yell at myself, when I'm tired of hating myself, I need you to hate me a little bit and push me over that line. And when you describe it in that framework, you can see like, oh man, if anything, this is making the problem worse. It's just extending out, burning the candle at both ends. And what we really need to do, like you said, Omar, is to reframe it for us to say, hey, let's find a way of moving that isn't feeling like you're trying to fix something that's broken. Let's move because we're humans. We do that.
It's changing that relationship with movement. And I would say exercise, but I don't even think that, I think exercise almost like, for some people is like a bit of a dirty word. They're like, oh, I hate exercising. When you say movement, like, yeah, it comes back to that idea of play, and like that we we move because we're human. Like it's natural to us to want to move. And I think that is also at the heart of powerlifting, and should be at the heart of powerlifting. Is not you do it because you have to, but you do it because you want to, because you enjoy the feeling of movement. And I think everyone, at least maybe I'm naive, but I really believe that there's gotta be something that everyone enjoys, a kind of movement that everyone enjoys doing. Like there must be something that you personally enjoy doing that is moving. Maybe you just haven't found it yet. And I think people, they go to the gym, and I feel like it gives gyms a bad name, because a lot of people go to the gym for that kind of punishment. Like, yes, punish me. Like I want to be sore and I want to hurt because I deserve it. Like,
Globo Gym.
Instead of being like, oh, I go to the gym because I like the feeling of being sore, or I like that form of movement.
No, that's well said. I mean, because basically I remember when I first started having a hint that, oh, I'm missing something here, is when I would have my clients say, like, I would tell them, like, we'd talk, because like you said, they're kind of like a rent-a-friend, right? And they would ask me about my life, and not that I would dominate the whole session talking about myself, but I'm not going to, like, you show someone vulnerability, they show you vulnerability, it's how you build a relationship. And they'd be like, oh, tell me about how your training's going. Well, I'm doing a contest prep, and so it's good. I'm seeing more detail, I'm changing my diet, I'm doing this training. And they go, oh, you're so disciplined. And my first thought was like, because as a young man, I was anything but disciplined. I was a total slacker. And I would say I found discipline through bodybuilding, but it never felt like I had to be disciplined to do bodybuilding or powerlifting. To this day, the thing I look forward to, unless it's one of those times where I am in a slog for whatever reason, which is rare, but my default relationship with lifting is my favorite part of the day is going to train. Mm-hmm. I love it. I mean, I think most powerlifters who stay with it for a long period of time, their favorite way to move, the way that's fun for them, is getting under something that is going to crush them and trying to stand up with it.
I think, and I think it makes so much sense that you've been in the lifting game for so long, because you have that attitude. If you continue to approach lifting and training as work, at which point are you just going to get burnt out and say, like, oh, I'm working my regular job, and then I'm going and doing more work in the evening when I go to the gym? Like, that's not really what it's about, man. Like, if it just feels like extra work to you, like, maybe you should rethink why you're doing it.
Absolutely. And to bring it full circle, so I realized this, like, when I started to realize this, I changed my practice as a personal trainer. Now, all of a sudden, I wasn't trying to fit them into the mold of powerlifting or bodybuilding, because I loved it and I assumed they would. I was like, oh, let's discover together what you love. I don't care if it's intramural softball. Yeah. Go do it. I don't get you, but that's not important. I get the same level of passion you have for whatever way of moving you like. And I think, to bring it full circle, I think for powerlifters, when you find yourself in that position where you are requiring a massive level of discipline, not just in a peaking block when you're hurt or sore or you have to cut weight, because there are absolutely times when having that card in your back pocket, the I'm a masochistic badass, playing that card is really important in all sport. Chips are down, and for me to win this record or to set a PB, I've got to pull a PB on my third deadlift. Absolutely. You need to have that confidence. You need to have that grit. You need to be able to grind. You need to get over your fear. And that's a lovely thing that comes from sport. Don't get me wrong. But that shouldn't be what's happening all the time. Because like you said, you'll just burn out. So if you find yourself in that place, like it sounds like you found yourself, Evie, shortly after your first world championship win, where you're starting to go, man, every session is a slog. I don't like this. Why am I doing that? I think that's a great early warning indicator, like I said, of going, hold on, I need to re-examine this, because what originally brought me to having like nosebleeds and eye-popping singles for fun is now not fun. Something's wrong. So I don't know.
I totally agree. And I think even now, like, I'd say there's still times that I struggle with, and I fall back on that sort of additional fuel that you have, like habit or discipline, or, that little bit that you have left over sometimes, and you have to use that instead of your usual motivation, because maybe it was a long day, or maybe like this week's training's hard, or maybe this week's training is boring. I feel like that's sometimes the hardest one to get through, is I'm like, oh, it's like the first week back, especially after lockdown, right? Like I found that training particularly hard because I was like, what do you mean? Like, I haven't been able to lift for like 6 weeks. Like I want to get like straight back under the bar. I want to be hitting like heavy singles. Yep. My coach was like, no. Yeah. Let's not do that. And so I had to rely on that, like on habit, on discipline a little bit, but it shouldn't be your fuel all the time, because it runs out.
Absolutely. And there's also a different motivational intention there. Like when you're working too hard because you're so excited about progress, or like you're manipulating, I'm going to get this nutrition, I'm going to buy these supplements, I'm going to do this, like you're planning it all and your eyes get wide and you're controlling all these variables. Like, sure, some of it might be a waste of money. You're taking on too much. You have unrealistic expectations of progress. You're really motivated, and the coach can help you maybe temper some of those things and avoid injury. Yeah. But there's nothing wrong with that. That's great, because that can be redirected. You know, that's just, I'm super excited, I'm motivated, and I love what I'm doing. Fantastic. Yeah. But it's, you know, I'm afraid that I'm not good enough, I'm not making enough progress, I'm going to change this in my program, I'm going to buy these supplements because I don't have it in me. Maybe it's external. Yeah. And I think it's difficult for a coach to always be able to tell, what is the motivating factor? Why is this person planning out every piece of their nutrition and training? Is it because they are just totally in love with this thing? Or is it because of like a fear of missing out, I'm not good enough, all those things?
I think the fear of missing out on gains, and I think you guys have spoken about it a bit before in other podcasts, like that drives quite a lot of decisions that lifters make. And I think, you know, like buying the supplements, changing coaches all the time, like trying random gimmicky things because they're like, well, maybe it'll make me magically stronger. And obviously that does not exist. The like magic cure for things doesn't exist. But one thing that I think is really important is being able to talk to your coach about the things that you want and like why you're doing the things that you're doing. And for your coach to be able to ask you about that, because I think that there is sort of like that's something that maybe doesn't get discussed as often. I think maybe you do it more so in your coaching, but at least in my experiences, we talk a lot about this sort of very practical, this is how the training's going to go, like, you know, this is what you're aiming for next comp. Like it's not much about like, what is your motivation and like, what do you want from this? And like, why are you doing this? What are the other things that are happening in your life that are also important?
Yeah, I think we do sometimes, because we all get so excited about some of the X's and O's, we forget that powerlifters are human, you know? But yeah, I think this should become a new term, Omar, FOMOG. Oh. Fear of missing out on gains.
Oh, that's a good one. That's a good one right there. You see that on social media, Eric, all the time. And I guess the question I was going to have for Evie is, how does social media add to that complexity? Because first you start off, okay, you might enjoy lifting. You find out, wow, I'm actually great at this. I'm competitive. You start winning. And so then you have that happening where there's that competition level. And then there's also the validation then from social media, where it's not only, okay, I got validated at the competition because I feel good, I did this objective accomplishment, but now you start getting idolized, right? So people start following you because of your lifting. I've actually, if you scroll far back enough, it's amusing. Shout out to Martins Lisi, actually. I saw his Instagram. It was Alan that sent me that. He just had a normal Instagram before of like him, like as basically as a kid. He was like 18. I think he's like 26 now or something. He's pretty damn young. But his Instagram when he first started, it was a normal Instagram in quotations, like not really a lifting one. Obviously he got stronger. He started posting it. And then it just changes everything entirely. And then you add on top of that, and I don't know if you're at that stage yet where you're deriving then income sources, like some income, maybe part of your income, all of your income for some people, where you're adding more complexity into the pot now. It's like, okay, I started doing this because I love to do it. I was good at it. I started winning competitions. Now people are following me because I'm good at it. Now I'm getting paid because I'm good at it. It's like, oh, wait a second. I just like to lift, you know? So can you talk a little bit, Evie, about having a social media following, how that's impacted things? You kind of spoke a little bit more before about the whole imposter syndrome, like whether or not like I should be here. Can you just talk to me how that extra layer, what it did to you when you kind of became more famous?
Yeah, I also used to have like a normal person Instagram. Yeah. And then powerlifting slowly took over, and now anyone who's you know, a non-powerlifting friend, and I'm like, you don't have to follow me on Instagram. Like, you don't want to see all that. It's all right. I think that I'm kind of, I would almost say lucky. I haven't gained a huge following on Instagram related to powerlifting. I think I've been able to fly a little bit under the radar, and I kind of think that's nice because I feel a little less pressure. You know, I'm not as big of a figure, as big of a name, but I do.
We're here to change that today.
We'll fix that. That's why you're here.
Yeah. We're now here to bring you the social pressure you've been missing out on.
Yeah, but you didn't want.
That I didn't want. I got sponsored somewhere between Worlds 2018 and Worlds 2019, and that adds to, there's a layer there of responsibility because you're now representing someone's brand, and you kind of, the agreement is that you're going to be posting on social media like what you're lifting, and you're going to wear the gear, and you're going to like show everyone like, oh, I'm so strong, and so you should also buy this gear, like, so you can be strong too. And that was a weird experience for me to be like, okay, like, I need to make sure I film my lifts. I need to make sure that like it looks good. It should be like heavy, because otherwise, like, who's going to watch it if it's not? And I have to be posting regularly. And for a while there, I was trying to be pretty disciplined about like, I guess using social media more as like creating that self-brand. But I don't like it. I don't like doing it. The responsibility to post regularly, being like, okay, I should post like at least every 2 days and like try and build up a following, because like there's this great brand and they're sponsoring me, and like they do so much for me, and I want to be able to give back to them and make it worth their while. But I didn't love feeling that like need to put things out there and like be this figure that I felt kind of wasn't me.
100%. No, I think Omar, that question kind of points to just how just being strong, all of a sudden you can look up one day and shit's gotten more complex. You know, now your strength is compared to other people. Oh shit. Now I have expectations that are maybe from others, definitely from myself, and certainly if you have a sponsor. Now I think we've established a pretty good kind of background understanding of what has led to, you know, Evie, who started lifting in 2016?
Yeah, 2016.
Right. So the last like 3 or so years. Now in 2020, we've all been challenged with our relationship with the iron. You know, many of us could not train the way we wanted to. I know there's a lot of people who could not train at all, or couldn't find the same motivation to train in a different way. Maybe it's for a good reason. The way they love to move is getting crushed by a barbell, like we've talked about. Or maybe they found, you know, the main thing that was driving them was something extrinsic and competing. So that could be a positive or negative thing. But nonetheless, positive or negative roots, however we want to frame it, I think people have had to ask that question. What are my motivations? Why do I lift? Do I enjoy this? What aspects about it do I enjoy? And for you, it wasn't just lockdown, but there was the Sheffield, which you were preparing for. Yeah. And then it went away. And then it was like, that's okay. We'll do the local comp. Yeah. And then it went away. It went away. Yeah. So talk to me about, with that understanding of the framing of that background of how you've had your struggles, I think like most lifters at your level do, and you didn't have any background in sport. So all of this is happening immediately. How have you navigated 2020 as far as these pressures and how they play out, and how competitions seem to be falling left and right, coming back, going away? What's that been an experience like for you?
Yeah, it's tough because at the start of this year, and obviously the first part of the year was supposed to be Sheffield, and that was really going to be the biggest comp ever for me. And we'd been building up for a while for that, and then like a lot of disappointment about not being able to compete. But I kind of told myself like, I'm not the only one, you know, we all can't compete. Like, it's not just me. And realistically, I wasn't in a position that I was going to win. So I didn't miss out on like a huge, you know, I missed out on competing, which would have been amazing for me, but I felt like it was okay. I could handle it. It took a while to get over that. I was definitely quite upset. But the situation was changing so fast. Hey, like as coronavirus was kicking off, and like, you know, the measures that came into New Zealand really quickly. Yeah. We went into lockdown like within like 3 days or so of that like max out we did. It was on the Sunday and we went into lockdown on like the Wednesday. So it took a while to like adjust to just that huge life thing. And I had to move house as well. I'd moved house really quickly. I was staying with like a friend's family. It was super hectic. Like all this stuff had been canceled. And I think I took a week of like mostly staying in bed, like watching YouTube. And then I was like, okay, right. Like I wanted to move again. Like I was missing the feeling. I felt pretty gross, like as you would staying in bed for like a lot of time. And my coach actually wrote me a program for the equipment that I had during lockdown. I had like some dumbbells, some bands. We had a cable machine, which was pretty good. And I just did a lot of like high rep hypertrophy stuff. And it's weird. Like at first I was like, this sucks. Like I should have been competing. Like this is not what I like doing. Like I'm a powerlifter. I want to have a barbell. And I was also really resentful of people who did have access to that equipment. It was kind of hard for me to like, you spend even more time on Instagram because you're at home not doing all that much, scrolling through, watching these people like with their full setup, like training as usual. And I was like, I'm going to be so weak after this. Like all of that I think very similar for everyone, that thought process of being like, they're going to be way, way further ahead. Like I've lost out on all these gains, the fear of missing out on gains.
FOMOG, the classic enemy of the Shire. Yes. Yep.
And then I don't know, like at some point I started to just enjoy learning new exercises. I was like, man, I've never done this before. Like I kind of like this one, and being like, okay, like getting a sick pump is like not all bad. Like I'm talking about being like, I can take like a bicep pick after like every session. I was like, this is not all bad.
My girl knows what's up.
I'm liking what I'm hearing right now.
And yeah, like as time progressed, there were definitely some days, and I think that was also just the nature of being in that incredibly uncertain time and like all the stress. There were some days where I kind of regressed and was like, no, I absolutely don't want to train today. Like I want to lie in bed. Like I feel terrible. And then there were days where I was super motivated and I'd like go for like a 2-hour walk and like come back and like train for ages and then be like, you know what, I want to do this exercise too, like pistol squats. I'd never done them before, so I learned how to do them, and I was like, yeah, I'm going to progress the pistol squat. So yeah, I think it was a challenge in many ways, but there were things that I learned to enjoy about it, and I learned learning new things and getting stronger in new ways. And I think that just for me, it confirmed that like, okay, you actually like, you just love moving and like you love lifting, and like, that's cool. that's nice to know.
Yeah. I think there were times when I wondered, when I was watching you do your thing, and based on the conversations we have had, and I was like, I wonder if when we come out of all this, will Evie know for sure, yeah, I'm a power lifter, and yeah, it's not just about winning, and the expectations are self-generated. If I'm a world champion or not, I still love to do this. So I guess you were in a prime position, I would say, to meet the challenge, the existential challenge of COVID as a lifter when one cannot lift as they wished. And I'd love to hear from you. Do you think now, looking at, even though Worlds is now canceled, at least for New Zealand, we're about halfway through the year. Can you look back and can you look forward, and where do you see your relationship with the sport from now on as Evie the lifter? Or just Evie?
I'd like to... I would say I definitely still struggle with like the identity aspect of it, of thinking like, oh, I must be the strongest. And now post lockdown, coming back into training, and there are definitely obviously the people who were able to train all the way through. And I'm like, oh, but I'm not going to be as strong. Like, what if I'm pushed off that pedestal? And I'm still coming to terms with that and being like, it's okay. Like, that's not why you do this. Like, you do it for the joy of it. And I'm competing tomorrow actually, and it's going to be my first comp as a 63, not cutting weight, none of that like must be competitive thing. I'm only allowed to go up to like 92.5%. So the numbers are kind of already decided, and it's the most chill I've ever felt. I'm like, wow, imagine like competing in this way where you like just rock up and be like, yeah, cool, I'm just gonna do it. So that's, there's this offer of this new way of doing things that doesn't involve this like huge stress. I'm like, that would be cool. And I think going forward, like that might be the way that I need to take it, especially as I pursue other things in my life, right? Like, I don't think powerlifting can always be the priority. If it can for you, like that's awesome. But there are other things that I want to do. And I think maybe next year it might be that powerlifting takes the back seat and I'll just do what I can do and enjoy it when I can and rock up to comps whenever it's possible. And I hope that my relationship with powerlifting continues for a long time. And, you know, at different times I can decide how much I want to give to it and when it works for me and when I'm like, this is more important right now and powerlifting is not the priority. I don't have to give it 100% of my life.
And I think that it sounds like all of a sudden you have options. There are, like you said, there are opportunities to view your relationship with the sport in different ways than it has been. And the openness to that is what I heard. And the maybe even excitement for possibilities of it being a new relationship. and ultimately, I think any relationship that is healthy, that is going to last, whether that's with people or with a thing like powerlifting, it's one that needs to be flexible and need to change with you so it can evolve. And I think when one has a very rigid relationship with only two options, either it's everything or I don't do it, it by default means that you have a really high risk of not doing this thing long term. And I can say that the one thing that determines success the one non-negotiable that determines success in a given pursuit of mastery is consistency. So I think it is something that I often ask people to ask the question of like, are you truly as dedicated, motivated, and about that life as you think you are if you're going to give it up if you couldn't win, or if you'd give it up when you no longer could compete?
Yeah.
Would you do it in the apocalypse? Would you get a squat bar when it was just you, Will Smith, and a bunch of zombies around?
And it's amazing, like a lot of people who so quickly kind of gave up training during lockdown, and I was really surprised by it because I was like, oh, well, you seem like you're really into training the rest of the time, but like, I mean, and there's a whole bunch of other external factors that could have impacted that, but I was like, that's really interesting to me. Like, if you don't have access to the equipment, you're like, nah, I'm just not going to do anything.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, really? Like,
no, Omar and I've had this exact same conversation, and I hope no one would hear that and take offense to it. I think because it sounds like there might have even been a point in your career where that could have happened to you. Like if COVID had happened in 2018 or 2017. And I know, like, man, I've told this story before. I think the turning point for my personal athletic relationship with the iron was when I was sitting in the car with Barb. It was back in Sacramento. We're talking 14 years ago. And I told her, I don't think I would keep lifting if I didn't think I could become Mr. Natural Olympia. And this voice in my head immediately went, that's a problem. And I went, yeah, you're right. But I think that's still a true statement right now. And from that point on, it's been me trying to have this self-discovery and have a healthy relationship with the iron. So I just want to say, Evie, I think your insight here, your vulnerability, your openness about it, at the very least, even if people don't relate to it, I hope it gives them, and I know they do, because there's plenty of people I relate to it. I think it gives them more possibilities of what it could be, what the relationship might be. And I think it's also cool for people who have never touched a weight before to see that you don't just because we're seeing this huge renaissance of like high-level athletes coming into powerlifting with powerlifting's growth, it doesn't mean that you might not be a sleeper. You might not have a 3 times body weight squat just hiding there, even though
it's in there.
Exactly. So I think personally, this is just a really cool story. This is why I wanted to have you on. I know that you thought tremendously about this, and I always respect people who try to understand themselves, because ultimately, what's the point of being around if you don't? And you're definitely going to be at odds with yourself if you don't understand yourself at some point. even if you do understand yourself, you're going to be at odds with yourself because we're complex and we have multiple pieces to us. Like right now, another thing you were describing was, hey, I have this inner voice that's saying, hey, they're going to be stronger than you. What if you lose the podium? But then I have this other inner voice that says, well, you don't just do it for the podium. You have other reasons. You're going to be doing this regardless. And I think the goal is to be able to have that conversation and then eventually figure out where you want to get to. So I just want to thank you for giving everyone who's listening that opportunity to have more voices, to become a little more schizophrenic for the greater good of their lifting career.
Yeah. Listen to them, but all of them.
That's right. Everyone deserves a seat at the table, even the one that tells you there's blood on the walls.
It's no big deal. As Eric said, the previous analogy where you said there's multiple people in the bus, who's driving the bus?
That's right.
You know, Eric, at this
driver?
time, I thought this was a fantastic episode. It was refreshing to hear how self-aware, Evie, you are, because, you know, I think sometimes lifters can have almost a myopic view. All or nothing. Here I am.
Yeah.
Like, you know, I'm going to die on the platform. Like, really, dog? You know, when their whole self-worth is predicated upon this one moment. And sometimes putting that extra pressure, again, not trying to mischaracterize anyone, turn them into a caricature, you know, to say that there's only one path to pursue excellence. But I found this conversation definitely refreshing. At this time, we would typically say, where can people find you? But we know you don't want that smoke. You don't want that extra pressure. So we're actually not going to ask you that and just ask you if you have any closing thoughts.
Thank you just for letting me spout about this. You know, like I talk about it a lot with other lifters, but I've never sort of had this platform before. And obviously, like, my Instagram is still a pretty small community, so it's cool that that you thought that this would be helpful for other people, and I really hope that it is, and I really hope that, like, everyone feels like they can be a bit more open about, like, that journey, and that they don't have to pretend that they're like, oh yeah, like always for the win, like competing is everything. Like they're allowed to show that vulnerability and be like, yeah, like sometimes it's tough.
Absolutely. We're all just figuring this shit out. I'm still trying to come to terms with how, you know, how difficult it is to be a world champion, you know, personally. So
Yeah, it was robbed from us, Erica, Evie. I don't know if you know this, but Eric and myself were going to compete in New Zealand's strongest man, 90 kilo, 80 kilo, and we're going to be the twin champs.
Yes.
That was preordained. It's manifest destiny. It was already meant to be. We saw it in the future. And then basically that's when COVID happened. So we were close to feeling what you felt being a world champion at the very local, regional level. Uncertain. We don't know what our competitors would have been like. Don't know the competition day, what would have happened. But we just know that we would have been twin champs.
I have full faith.
yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah. So did we. Some might even say an unreasonable level of unfounded faith in our own likelihood to win. But just in the same way that you are definitely did win a Junior World Championships in 2018, we were predicted, besides COVID, to win a local strongman comp in 2 different weight classes, maybe. Probably not. But so same.
We
really,
relate, Evie. What I'm saying is your struggles are our struggles, is what I want you to know. That's it.
That's right. Well, Evie, I really appreciate your time. I appreciate your insight. And any final words before Omar becomes the closeout king?
This has been great. Thank you so much for having me. This is my favorite podcast. I'm just going to throw that in there.
You can come back anytime,
fangirl
Evie.
moment.
I already was enjoying this episode, but now it's at the tippity top.
That's right. Awesome. Well, thank you very much for that. Omar, take us into the sunset, my brother.
My man, do we want to get Evie? Where can people not find you? I think we'd be remiss if we didn't say that. If you don't want to mention it, we'll skip right by that. But we ask all guests that, and definitely.
It's your platform to not or to share your platform.
Exactly.
It's BV with like the word B and then Evie. So there's 3 E's in the middle there.
Yeah.
On Instagram. So BV. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So find her, ask her questions, put a lot of pressure on her.
Yeah.
It's as you've seen, she's like a diamond. The more pressure, the better. Yeah. Either that or she'll crack, and I'll feel bad. So yeah.
And this was
powerlifting.
This was the downfall. Yeah.
Yeah. It was at this moment. It's like, when did everything change? Oh, that Iron Culture episode. Worst mistake of my life. I was like, wow. Well, at least we're known for something.
That's right.
Yeah.
Infamous.
Evie, I want to thank you for being on. We will make sure to link your social media in the description for people to check you out if they want. I just want to say once again, we're very excited to announce our upcoming Masculinity in Crisis tour. Don't listen to anything we said before. 2021. Maybe we might allow you to become part of our army, or, we're still figuring things out, but at the very least, we'll announce that we're in a crisis right now and we're here to save the world. 2021. On iTunes, you could go ahead and leave us a rating and review. If only it's a 5-star review. If it's not, don't bother. On YouTube, you can leave a comment. We'll do our best to respond, and we're back every single Monday from now until the end of time. We'll see you then.